Last time we were taking a look at some of the main foundational ideas that shape the way that humanity is seen, or at least reflect the way that humanity is seen within the 20th century. I wanted to take a look at the lost generation. The lost generation comes in the aftermath of World War One, and it mainly comes from a quote given by Gertrude Stein, and Hemingway quotes it in his foundational text, The Sun Also Rises, which was his first novel that he published in the 1920s that focuses on bullfighting. But mainly, what it's dealing with is Jake Barnes is the protagonist who is searching for meaning in the aftermath of war. And Gertrude Stein, she's taken a look at his writings and the writings of F. Scott Fitzgerald, one of Hemingway's friends and contemporaries, she says that about Hemingway's and Fitzgerald's generation, she says, you are all a lost generation, meaning that they're kind of spiritually adrift, they're socially adrift, they're politically adrift, they just kind of wander around Europe. And their writings kind of reflect this lack of direction. And so it's just as though they're kind of adrift out in the middle of the sea without any clear direction. And so that's the meaning of the lost generation. And it reflects some of the ideas that we've been taking a look at before with Darwin, Nietzsche, and Freud. And they're going to take a look at those ideas, not necessarily specifically, but they'll be influenced and kind of as a residual effect by how they're capturing, how they're understanding the changes to humanity in the modern world. Here's just kind of a quote that summarizes my understanding of the lost generation as I've studied it. And it says that people who experienced the war lacked clear direction, and many moved to Europe. These expatriates spent most of their time traveling from country to country, drinking lots of alcohol, and maintaining much looser moral standards than previous generations. Those who experienced World War I were frustrated by and alienated from traditional ideals of heroism, courage, bravery, honor, dedication, and sacrifice. All of these values that nationalism promoted, right? Die for your country, be brave, be heroic, bring honor to your people, to your family, to your country, sacrifice yourself for others. And at the end of World War One, where it felt like there was meaningless because there was no major objectives that were gained, just 20 million lives that were lost. And so they took a look at those old ideas and they said, yeah, that's not working for me. And so they started to write on this, their kind of frustrations with these older ideas. And to them, life seemed to lack meaning. And so what we see within most of the writings of the lost generation within, Hemingway and Fitzgerald are kind of the monoliths of that group. What we mainly see is people that are searching for meaning in a world of ashes, in a world that's been torn down by nationalism and patriotism and the loss of these values and the destruction of these values. They're trying to find, well, what matters now? If you take away, nationalism, if you take away patriotism, what do we have that binds us together as human beings? And so they're really searching for meaning, and a lot of their works do have that lack of spiritual direction. That it's not as though they're anti-religious. It's just as though they're trying to find spirituality. They're trying to find religious meaning when they feel betrayed by religious institutions that said, "Go die for God and country." And those religious institutions, by and large, were corrupted by nationalism, and they have now lost their meaning. So they're trying to find new significance within the modern world. So I had you read this week a writing by Ernest Hemingway, writer of The Lost Generation, that captures a lot of that lack of direction, that lack of certainty, as we see within Hills Like White Elephants, right? What we see within this are two people that are traveling through Europe, expatriates speaking English, and so they're probably coming from, the United States or somewhere. And they're mainly drinking and having kind of this ongoing kind of party. And there seems to be somewhat of a lack of direction there. We'll talk about it, the stories in just a second, but it does have much more complexity to it. But you can see this idea of people that are just kind of drifting through the in the story. I wanted to take a look at one of the major ideas of Hemingway, and that's called the theory of omission. And the theory of omission is summarized by Hemingway here in one of his books called The Death in the Afternoon, which is about bullfighting. and he kind of summarizes what his style is all about. He says, if a writer of prose knows enough about what he is writing about, he may omit things as strongly as though the writer has stated them. The dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only one-eighth of it being above water. The writer who omits things because he does not know them only makes hollow places in his writings. And so, what we see with Hemingway in his ideas is they're going to be much shorter than the writings of Dickens and Melville of the previous century, right? Where they go on and writing about the villages and everyone in the village and their life, right? He doesn't write about that, right? His sentences are much shorter, much more immediate, much more direct than that. And his writings generally are much shorter than the older novels of the 19th century. But what he's getting at here with the iceberg theory is that the words choices that he uses, the words on the page are going to be only one-eighth of the story. What he's going to do is he's going to require the reader to figure out the rest of the seven-eighths of the story. So the meaning, the interpretation of that comes from our, analysis, our understanding. And so he's going to leave out things like adverbs and adjectives, which generally are a subtle way that a writer can get you to think about how he or she feels about a character. He's going to leave that out. And it's mainly going to be just very short, precise sentences that direct us. As we take a look at Hills Like White Elephants, I want you to read it before you come to the lecture. So if you haven't read it yet, pause this and come back later. But I want to take a look at some of the major ideas of the story and to uncover that seven-eighths of that iceberg and help you out to go through it. Because most of the time when people read through it the first time, they say, hey, it's a story about two people drinking at a bar. I didn't get it, right? And they miss that seven-eighths iceberg. That iceberg just kind of floats right by them. And if that happened to you, that's okay. That generally happens on the first reading. But I want to teach you how to dig deeper within literature and to find connections, to find meaning, to help you to be able to think about certain passages and some of the deeper symbolism that might be there, right? First of all, as we take a look at the title of the story, Hills Like White Elephants. That sounds kind of like an interesting title, right? It's kind of, it sounds very poetic and literary. But then we have to think about what it means, right? So as we think about white elephants, that's actually referring to something very specific. It's referring to a elephant party. So if you've ever been to a white elephant party, this is, then you'll know what this is. But if you haven't been to a white elephant party, it's when you're required to bring perhaps a random gift, a gift around the house, or something that's less value to you. You wrap it up and then you have a gift exchange. And then you open up the gifts, and then it could be something meaningless to a person, but it could be something meaningful. But the question is what you do with the gift, right? How you interpret that gift. And so as we think about Hills Like White Elephants, what is the white elephant within the story? What's the gift that could have meaning and could not have meaning, right? Could have some type of significance and importance, but it might not, right? As we take a look at the story, that's more than just two people drinking at a bar. It's two people that are discussing whether they're going to have an abortion. And so thinking about the lost generation of their spiritually adrift, thinking about the ideas of, the understanding or the, kind of the modern kind of view with people losing their religious affiliation and as Darwin suggests, we're kind of questioning what this all means. What we see is that, what are we going to do with life? What's the meaning of life? And so Hemingway, in a subtle way, starts to get us to question what is the meaning of life? And particularly in the aftermath, he writes the story in 1927. What is the meaning of life in the aftermath of World War One? What does that mean, right? So he's getting us to think about that, whether life, what is the value of life within the modern world? Not again, not to celebrate, hey, this is what we should do, but at least reflecting on some of the values that he is noticing, right? So this is just a quick drawing that I created that gets you to think about the setting because some of the symbolism here deals with the setting, right? So as we take a look at the setting, they're at a train station. The two individuals, the American, as he's called, the man, and Jig, his significant other. I'm sorry, that keeps moving. I don't know why the mouse keeps moving. It's just kind of randomly. It kind of has a mind of its own. But as they're sitting at the table, they're looking off at the dry hills, right? She's initially looking at the dry hills, and then at the kind of middle point of the story, she's going to get up. She's going to go to the other side of the train tracks, and she's going to see the Ebro River, the fields of grain, and the trees. And so, again, thinking about what this actually means, right? So as they're on a train, these train tracks, right? They're a train station between these two lines of rails. It seems as though they're heading in two different directions, right? And the question is, what's their destination going to be, right? I mean, in a literal sense, right? They're actually literally going to one, town. But in a kind of literary sense, what is their direction, right? So she's contemplating the dry hills. What is she thinking about? Sorry, again, the mouse has a mind of its own. And then as she goes to over here, what does she think about when she sees the river, right? She's kind of caught in between two choices, between barrenness and fertility. And the question is, what choice is she going to make? And so let's read through this just together. I'm not going to read through, the whole thing. I'll read through most of it, but I'll skip around a little bit. But I'm going to pause and have you think about, what is the deeper meaning here? The hills across the Ebro were long and white. On this side, there was no shade and no trees, and the station was between two lines of rails in the sun, which is the image that I just showed you. Close against this side of the station, there was the warm shadow of the building and a curtain made of string of bamboo beads hung across the open door into the bar to keep flies out. The American and the girl with him sat at the table in shade. And so, stopping there for a moment, Hemingway says it's the American. So that gives us the idea that these are, expatriates, the American part of the lost generation, just kind of drifting around Europe. And so the 1927 audience would say, oh, these are, part of those kind of people that just went to Europe and traveled after the war. Because one of the reasons that they traveled was because living was so cheap in Europe, and after everything was devastated, and there's really, left a gaping hole of the population there, the economies had just crumbled after the war, and so it was really cheap to live there. So a lot of Americans went over to Europe to live very cheaply, and because they lost the kind of political and spiritual direction, they didn't really have any definite aims in life. Wasn't like there was any common aspiration. They were just kind of drifting around, and so we see that. So the 1927 audience would recognize that. But it's interesting. So he says it's the American, and then he says he refers to the person with him as the girl, right? He doesn't refer to her as the woman. He refers to her as the girl. So then we have to think about what that means, right? So that would seem to suggest that she is young and younger, certainly younger than, but she's definitely younger, right? So she's probably more around the age of early 20s or something like that. Still kind of young and impressionable, and that's certainly going to play out within the story, right? Outside the building. It was very hot, and the express from Barcelona would come in 40 minutes. It stopped at this junction for 2 minutes and went on to Madrid. And so, again, stopping here, what does that mean, right? Where are we within the world, right? So Barcelona, Madrid puts us in Spain, right? Something that the 1927 audience would know, and something that we probably should know today, is that Spain is very traditional. That I went to Spain in 2006, and even in 2006, it was pretty traditional. They were pretty proud of their culture, pretty proud of their heritage, which is great. And they're also very Catholic. That was also something that I noticed. And so we think about the context of the story, what's going on within it, about abortion. How do Catholics feel about abortion? Again, so he's framing this within our mindset to help us to kind of, even though he's not telling us, hey, I'm putting you in Barcelona because I want you to think about abortion, he's putting that onus on us to be able to figure out. These are some kind of subtle hints, right? Part of that's 1/8 of the iceberg that he gives us. And then we have to figure out, the 7/8 of, oh, Spain is very Catholic. I wonder how that plays into the story. It stopped at this junction for 2 minutes and went on to Madrid. The girl was looking off at the line of hills. They were white in the sun, and the country was brown and dry. And so again, this is what she is looking at. So these are actually the image of the brown hills that she would be looking at. And then we have their conversation. So for most Hemingway stories, what we have is just kind of an introduction to the setting, and then we have a lot of dialogue. And there's not a lot of commentary from the author on the dialogue. We just have the dialogue, and then we have to kind of infer what it means. And so I'll help you to make some of those inferences. I'm not going to tell you what to think about it, but I'll give you some questions to consider. She says, they look like wet elephants, he said. I've never seen one. The man drank his beer, right? So as we think about her, as she's looking at this, she kind of has a childlike mindset. She's taking a look at something and she's kind of applying something else that really isn't there, right? So she has an imaginative mind. And so that tells us that she's, still somewhat young and still somewhat naive. And the man is kind of more of a factual person. He just kind of says, "I've never seen one." And he kind of tries to move on with his day. And then she says, "No, you wouldn't have." He replies, "I might have," the man said. "Just because you say I wouldn't have doesn't prove anything," right? And at this point, they're kind of talking about nothingness, as most couples talk about. You probably can hear a conversation similar to this at the crossroads on BYUI campus, right? People, two people in love talking about one another, and then just kind of a little squabble that doesn't really mean a whole lot, kind of breaks out, and it's just about nothingness, right? But it's going to get really serious all of a sudden. Another hallmark of a Hemingway story is that you have unexpected violence that just suddenly happens to suggest that the world, much like what we see within Darwin's Struggle for Survival or Nietzsche, where are we going where's the earth moving now that it's unchained its sun, right? Gives us this sense of chaos. And so we do see a sense of chaos within his stories. The girl looked at the big curtain. "They've painted something on it," she said. "What does it say?" "Anis del Toro." It's a drink, right? Some of you Spanish speakers will know the translation to that. I'll leave that up to you. But again, what we see here is that she doesn't speak the language and he does. All right. So then we have to make some inferences. What does that mean about the dynamics of their relationship? She's younger than him. She doesn't speak the language. He does, right? So who has power, or who can we assume has power in this relationship? And that's going to help us to understand what's going on with the conversation about the abortion. She asked, right, kind of an imaginative, young, kind of naive way, "Can we try it?" The man called, "Listen," through the curtain. The woman came out from the bar. Then he speaks to the waitress. "Four reales. We want two anis del toro." With water? "Do you want water with it?" "I don't know," the girl said. "Is it good with water?" "It's all right." Again, she's asking him for advice, asking for his direction. "You want them with water?" asked the woman, the waitress. And she says, "Yes, with water." The girl looked across at the hills. "They're lovely hills," she said. "They don't really look like white elephants. I just meant the coloring of their skin to the trees." Again, she's kind of trying to justify her imaginative mindset, maybe trying to be a little bit more kind of adult, trying to save herself a little bit. And then he just kind of completely ignores it, right? He just kind of says, the factual kind of side of him just says, "Should we have another drink?" She says, "All right." The warm wind blew the bead curtain against the table. And now we have the kind of the serious component of the story. He says, "It's really an awfully simple operation, Jig," the man said. "It's not really an operation at all." And so, first of all, what we see here is kind of her nickname that he refers to as kind of a gesture of love. But then he juxtaposes that gesture of love with the inference that about an operation, right? So, an operation that's not really an operation to the 1927 mindset that these are people, Americans in Europe drifting, drinking large quantities of alcohol in a relationship, they would know that that meant an abortion. Now, in 1927, Hemingway could not use that term because it would have been censored, and so he finds more of a clever way around that problem, and so he just refers to it very subtly here. Now, in the 2020. We don't really kind of see that. We kind of would miss that inference, but in 1927 mind, they would say, "Oh, I know what's going on here." And then as he to juxtapose this, right, it's really awfully simple operation. It's not really an operation at all. Then we have this with the next line. The girl looked to the ground the table legs rested on, right? So as we think about that, why do her eyes look to the ground, right? As she kind of looks away from it, she's not looking it in the eye. And so thinking about this, right, as you are at home and you're probably bothering your parents right now, and they probably then say to you, "Isn't it about time you get a job, or isn't it about time you get married, or whatever the case may be?" Where do your eyes go, right? Generally, when we're trying to escape a conversation, they turn away, right? And so she's mentally trying to withdraw from this conversation. They probably had it before, and she knows where it's going to go. But again, to think about who wants this operation, who wants this gift, the kind of the white elephant, and who doesn't, right? And then he continues on, trying to encourage her. "I know you wouldn't mind it, Jig. It's really not anything. It's just to let the air in." And that's another reference to the abortion, right? Opening up the placenta lets the air in, and then the fetus slowly dies. The girl did not say anything. And anytime someone doesn't say anything in a Hemingway story, they're saying a lot. What they're saying is, I don't want to talk about this. I'm trying to get away, right? So they're emotionally shutting down and withdrawing from the conversation. And then he still tries to encourage her, I'll go with you and I'll stay with you all the time. They just let the air in and then it's all perfectly natural. Then what will we do afterward? We'll be fine afterward, just like we were before. What makes you think so? That's the only thing that bothers us. It's the only thing that's made us unhappy, right? So again, the lost generation is about happiness, having a good time, right? And this is now they're having to think about something that's very serious, right? So his first knee-jerk reaction is to get rid of it, right? But she suggests that it might be a little bit more complex than that. And so we'll see that kind of teased out throughout the story. The girl looked at the bead curtain, put her hand out, and took hold of two of the string of beads. And you think then we'll be all right and be happy? I know we will. You don't have to be afraid. I've known lots of people that have done it. So have I, said the girl. And afterward they were all so happy. Well, the man said, if you don't want to, you don't have to. I wouldn't have you do it if you didn't want to. But I know it's perfectly simple. And you really want to? I think it's the best thing to do. But I don't want to do it if you don't really want to. Stopping here, as we go through this conversation, they're going to start to reveal something about themselves, something about their insecurity, something about their fears without Hemingway telling us what it is. And so I want you to as we go through this, think about what is she afraid of versus what is he afraid of. Right? And I think that this reveals a core part of human relationships. As we talk about things within human relationships, we tend to talk around what our real fears are, and we then kind of export them or we transfer them onto to other things. And so I want you to see if you can find that within the story, because Hemingway does it kind of in a very interesting way. And then she says, and if I do it, you'll be happy and things will be like they were and you'll love me, right? So again, thinking about what is she afraid of? I love you now. You know I love you. I know, but if I do it, then it'll be nice again if I say things like white elephants and you'll like it. I love it. I love it now, but I just can't think about it. You know how I get when I worry, right? So again, what is he worried about? What is she worried about? If I do it, you won't ever worry? I won't worry about that because it's perfectly simple. Then I'll do it because I don't care about me. What do you mean? I don't care about me. Well, I care about you. Oh, yes, but I don't care about me. And I'll do it and everything will be fine. I don't want you to do it if you feel that way. Again, we have to think about who has power in the relationship, who's kind of pushing, who's kind of urging uh, what to happen, right? As they think about this white elephant, the gift of the baby, what are they, who has power of influence, right? And so, as again, as we think about that, that when she says, "I don't care about me," what does she mean by that, right? We could interpret that to mean that she just, only cares about him. It could be that she feels so kind of beaten down that she doesn't really have any self-respect for herself. Or we can kind of view it as maybe she's just being manipulative and saying, I don't care about me. And then he kind of has to retreat a little bit. I'm not sure. All right. That's going to depend upon each individual. As we talked about before with works of art like a beer, what we're going to see is kind of ourselves reflected into the story, right? As we interpret it, it's going to depend upon the baggage that we bring into the story. So I don't want to impose that interpretation onto you, but it's something to think about. What does she mean by that? But again, I want you to think about who has power in the relationship to this point. How do we see it? And who's more childlike? And how do we see this, right? And so then we're going to see a transition of her kind of mindset. She's going to have what is known in literature as an epiphany, right? An epiphany is a change, a sudden realization that causes a change of character. And so we kind of see her acting one way up to this point, and then after this point, she's going to be very different. The girl stood up and walked across the end of the station. Across on the other side were fields of grain and the trees along the banks of the Ebro. Far away beyond the river were mountains. The shadow of the cloud moved across the grain, and she saw the river through the trees. And so again, what is she thinking? And she's thinking about this perhaps without even really consciously thinking about it. As she thinks about this conversation, what's she going to do? And I want you to notice how she changes when she comes back to the table. She says, and we could have all this. We could have everything, and every day we make it more impossible. What did you say? I said we could have everything. We can have everything. No, we can't, right? So I want you to think about now as she comes back, who is the realist and who's the one that has childlike imaginations, right? It's mainly children that say that they can have the whole world, that they're going to be, king of the world one day, right? That they're going to own the whole world, whatever the case may be. And then when you become an adult, you start to realize that that's really impractical and you start to make more of a realistic goals for yourself. And so, again, who's kind of imaginative and who is and unrealistic and who is more realistic in this relationship now, right? Who he kind of wants to preserve this idea of maintaining this lifestyle of just drifting along, right? And she says, no, we can't. We can have the whole world, he says. No, we can't. We can go everywhere, right? Again, this kind of idea of drifting around the lost generation. No, we can't. It isn't ours anymore. So we have to think about what does she mean by that? What is it? What is it? And if it's not ours, who is it? And it could be it's not ours as the two of them. It's ours as the three of us. We're now a family, right? Maybe that's what she's suggesting. Or maybe she's suggesting that, if we go through with this, that we're going to lose somehow our souls, or we're going to lose our, further kind of spirituality. Maybe that's what she means by it as well, right? He says it's ours. No, it isn't. And once they take it away, you never get it back. Again, we have to think about what that it is, right? Is that it's probably the baby, but it also could be, their spirituality, their innocence, right? But they haven't taken away. We'll wait and see. Come on back in the shade. He said, you mustn't feel that way. I don't feel any way, the girl said. I just know things. I don't want you to do anything you don't want to do. Again, think about what is she afraid of versus what is he afraid of, and how willing are they to kind of stand up for their own individual convictions. He says, she says, I realize, the girl said, can't we maybe stop talking? They sat down at the table, and the girl looked across at the hills on the dry side of the valley, and the man looked at her and at the table. You've got to realize, he said, that I don't want you to do it if you don't want to. I'm perfectly willing to go through with it if it means anything to you. Again, the reference to the baby with the pronoun it, right? She asked, doesn't it mean anything to you? We could get along. And here's where I want you to think about what is he afraid of? Of course it does, but I don't want anybody but you. I don't want anyone else. And I know it's perfectly simple, right? So again, what is he afraid of? What is she afraid of, right? Why doesn't she want to stand up to him? Why is she a little bit afraid to kind of push her, be more assertive? What is he afraid of? Why is he pushing her to do this, right? And maybe the answer is both of them are afraid of the same thing, right? So something to consider. She says, yes, you know it's perfectly simple. It's all right for you to say that, but I do know it, he says. Would you do something for me now? I'd do anything for you. Would you please, 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 please stop talking? Right? So again, as we take a look at this relationship, some people, as they read this story, they kind of see it as the man is always just in control. He's dominating. He's kind of brutalizing her. And I want you to think about if that's necessarily true, right? Does she stand her own ground? Does she kind of push back? And when she doesn't stand her own ground, we have to think about why she doesn't stand her ground. Is she picking her own battles and kind of collecting herself or waiting for the right moment, perhaps? And some people interpret the story as the man's a complete jerk, and how dare he ask her to do something that she's not feeling comfortable with, or the horror of what he's asking her to do, and that is all problematic. But there might be more to him than him just being selfish and only wanting this kind of superficiality. There might be more to the story. That's definitely part of it, but there might be more complexity as we look deeper. And here we see as we go towards the end of the story, the girl smiled brightly at the woman to thank her. He says, and this is the first time we see her smile, right, within the story. She kind of had some kind of, brightness when she was talking about the hills looking like white elephants. But this is really the first time that she smiles, right? So again, perhaps she's kind of come to some realization or some understanding, or she's made some type of decision. She's kind of crossed some road in her life. And then he says, I'd better take the bags over to the other side of the station, the man said. She smiled at him. And so maybe been some reconciliation, or maybe there's been some common vision that they now share, because it didn't seem like they were on the same page at first, but now it seems as though they're at least heading in some common direction. He picked up the two heavy bags and carried them around the station to the other tracks. He looked up the tracks but could not see the train. Coming back, he walked through the bar room where people waiting for the train were drinking. He drank an anise at the bar and looked at the people. They were all waiting reasonably for the train. Okay, think about what is he seeing and what kind of realization might he be making. He went out through the big curtain. She was sitting at the bar, or sorry, sitting at the table and smiled at him. Do you feel better? He asked. I feel fine, she said. There's nothing wrong with me. I feel fine. Right. So as we think about this, think one way to kind of think about it is how much does the setting influence the interpretation of the story, right? And Hemingway does this without really giving us any, heavy-handed, heavy-fisted, this is what you have to think about it, this is how you have to feel about it, or this is what it means, right? He just sets the story at that they're at the crossroads in Spain between Madrid and Barcelona. And they're just kind of traveling and having drinks and they have a conversation, right? So that's kind of a superficial kind of understanding of what happens in the story. But as we start to dig deeper, we start to see that the dry hills and the fields of grain, that the train station, the tracks, they all have different meaning and bearing on the story. And as we think about their needs and their desires, we have to think about these characters are just they're more complex, even though this is labeled as the lost generation. They're socially adrift. They're kind of moving without clear direction and clear aim. It's not as if to say that they're just superficial and shallow characters, right? They actually have anxieties, they actually have concerns. They're trying to find meaning in the world that seems to lack meaning, trying to pick up life amidst the ashes of World War One to try to find where to go. And as you think about the end of the story, I want you to infer, what do you think happens? Do you think that she has the abortion? Do you think that she doesn't have the abortion? What do you think happens 6 months from now? Where do you see this relationship going? And so these are some things that Hemingway doesn't tell us, and some people get really frustrated with Hemingway for not telling us the end of the story. And some people want those stories to be kind of packaged up nice and tight with a little bow. The author tells you this is the story, this is how it ends, and this is what you're supposed to think, and just kind of spoon feeding us all this information, kind of cramming it down our throats. But I personally kind of like the idea of keeping it open because then we kind of can bring our own interpretation, our own insights to the story as we think about how it potentially could end for them, right? As we always think about what happens next. And so this is an introduction to the lost generation, some of their concerns, some of their writings that reflect some of the changes that are happening in the aftermath of World War One.